From cook to national hero, the incredible story of Doris Miller, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in. Before the sun had fully risen over the tranquil naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, the sky erupted. It was not the familiar drone of American patrol planes, but the angry buzz of hundreds of Japanese aircraft descending, like hornets upon the unsuspecting Pacific Fleet, moored peacefully in the bay. Bombs whistled down, torpedoes carved deadly paths through the water, and the air filled with the shriek of diving planes and the roar of explosions. Aboard the battleship USS West Virginia, berthed outboard of the USS Tennessee along Battleship Row, the Sunday morning calm shattered into a nightmare of fire, steel, and death. Chaos reigned supreme. Deafening explosions rocked the massive vessel as multiple torpedoes, designed specifically for the shallow harbor waters, slammed into its port side. The ship shuddered violently, listing heavily as seawater surged through gaping holes torn in its hull. On deck, sailors scrambled amidst strafing fire, seeking cover that didn't exist. Gaping wounds appeared on bodies moments before alive and whole. The screams of the wounded and dying mingled with the shriek of twisting metal and the incessant roar of attacking planes. The acrid stench of burning oil from ruptured fuel tanks mixed sickeningly with the smell of cordite and seared flesh, choking the air. To the men caught in this maelstrom, the attackers seemed like phantoms, precise, relentless, invincible. American power in the Pacific, represented by these mighty battleships, was being systematically dismantled, sunk, and burned before their very eyes. The feeling wasn't just fear. It was a profound, paralyzing sense of helplessness against an overwhelming, unforeseen storm. But amidst this pandemonium, aboard a dying ship rapidly settling into the mud of the harbor bottom, something extraordinary, something utterly unexpected was about to happen. The American Navy of 1941 was a powerful force, but it was also a deeply flawed institution reflecting the pervasive racial segregation of the nation it served. Its structure was rigid, its traditions deeply ingrained, and its policies explicitly limited the roles and opportunities available to African American sailors. They were relegated almost exclusively to the menial, non-combatant positions of the messman branch, serving as cooks, stewards, valets, and mess attendants for the white officers and crew. They were considered by policy and prejudice incapable or unworthy of bearing arms in defense of their nation. But that deeply entrenched system, that comfortable edifice of racial hierarchy, was about to be proven catastrophically, undeniably wrong. Because on that shattered, burning deck, one of those men, a ship's cook, third class, barred from combat training and assigned to the galley, was about to transcend his designated role and emerge as one of the greatest, most inspirational heroes of that horrific day. His name was Doris Miller, and against all odds, against all regulations, he was about to fight back. How did this happen? How did a man whose daily duties involved preparing meals and clearing tables, a man systematically denied the training afforded to his white shipmates, find himself manning one of the ship's most potent defensive weapons under the most intense attack in American history? Doris Miller's story is far more than a simple tale of battlefield bravery. It is a profound testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a stark illustration of potential unleashed when prejudice is momentarily overwhelmed by crisis. It is the story of a man refusing to be defined by the limitations others imposed upon him. If you want to truly understand the depth of his courage, the context of his actions, and the enduring power of his legacy, a legacy still unfolding today, stay with us. Hit that like button if you believe heroism knows no color, and subscribe for more deep dives into the untold stories of military history. The details will astound you. To understand the extraordinary events of December 7th, you must first understand the ordinary world from which Doris Miller came, and the deeply segregated Navy he joined. Born in Waco, Texas on October 12, 1919, into a family of sharecroppers, Doris, often called Dory by those who knew him, grew up experiencing the harsh realities of rural life in the Jim Crow South. He was one of 4 sons, known for his physical strength and quiet demeanor. He worked diligently on the family farm, developing a powerful build honed by manual labor. In high school, he found an outlet for his physicality on the football field, playing fullback for Waco's at J. Moore High School. But educational and economic opportunities for a young black man in Depression-era Texas were scarce. Seeking adventure, a chance to see the world beyond the cotton fields, and crucially, a steady income to help support his struggling family, Miller made a decision that would alter the course of his life. He enlisted in the United States Navy on September 16, 1939. However, the Navy that Miller entered was far from an equal opportunity employer. It was a microcosm of the segregated society it represented. While black men had served in the Navy since its inception, Their roles had become increasingly restricted following World War I by 1939. Official policy confined African American enlistees almost exclusively to the messman branch. They were stewards, cooks, valets, essentially domestic servants in uniform, tasked with tending to the needs of the white officer corps and crew. They were explicitly barred from receiving training in combat specialties, forbidden from rising through the general service ratings available to white sailors, and faced an impenetrable ceiling on promotion within their own segregated branch. The villain Miller faced wasn't solely the Axis powers. It was the ingrained prejudice within his own military, a system that questioned his capabilities and denied his full potential based solely on the color of his skin. Miller accepted his assignment as a mess attendant, 3rd class. He underwent basic training and was assigned to the battleship USS West Virginia BB-48, homeported at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Known for his strength, reliability, and quiet professionalism, Miller excelled within the narrow confines of his role. He became the ship's heavyweight boxing champion, a testament to his athletic prowess. By December 1941, he had been promoted to ship's cook, 3rd class. His duties involved preparing food in the galley, maintaining cleanliness, and serving meals. He was trained to handle ladles and pots, not machine guns and ammunition belts. That was the Navy's doctrine. Its internal enemy, the deeply flawed belief that African Americans lack the intelligence, courage, or aptitude for combat roles. The protagonist, therefore, wasn't just Miller the individual, but the vast, untapped reservoir of human potential that the Navy was systematically suppressing within its ranks. On the tranquil Sunday morning of December 7, 1941, Miller was performing his routine duties. According to most accounts, he was below decks, collecting laundry in preparation for the day's work, when the first jarring explosions ripped through the ship. The call to general quarters blared over the loudspeakers. "Air raid, Pearl Harbor, this is no drill." Miller immediately headed towards his assigned battle station, an anti-aircraft battery magazine located amidships. It was his duty to supply ammunition to the gunners above, but he never made it. As he navigated the passageways, already beginning to list from the initial torpedo hits, he found his route blocked by damage and flooding. A massive Japanese Type 91 aerial torpedo, one of possibly 7 that struck the West Virginia in quick succession, had likely detonated near his station, rendering it inaccessible or destroyed. The origin of the flaw, the Navy's rigid segregation that placed men like Miller in vulnerable, non-combat support roles, had ironically put him directly in harm's way, while simultaneously denying him the means to effectively fight back. The Japanese attack on the West Virginia was a textbook example of devastating aerial assault. Launched from carriers hundreds of miles away, the Japanese pilots pressed their attacks with skill and suicidal determination. The West Virginia, moored outboard of the Tennessee and thus fully exposed, bore the brunt of the initial torpedo attack along Battleship Row. At least 7 torpedoes ripped into its port side, tearing massive holes below the waterline. Simultaneously, 2 armor-piercing bombs dropped from high-altitude bombers found their mark. One failed to detonate deep within the ship, but the other struck near Turret 3, its explosion adding to the carnage. Water poured into the breached hull at an alarming rate. The massive battleship began listing heavily to port, threatening to capsize like the nearby USS Oklahoma. Quick counterflooding by damage control parties stabilized the list but caused the ship to settle rapidly onto the shallow harbor bottom. On the bridge, chaos mirrored the destruction below. Shrapnel from near misses and bomb fragments swept the exposed structure. Captain Mervyn Benyon, the ship's commanding officer, was struck in the abdomen by a large metal fragment, likely originating from a bomb that hit the neighboring Tennessee's Turret 2. The wound was mortal. Fires raged across the superstructure, fueled by ruptured oil lines and stored supplies. Dense black smoke billowed into the morning sky. The ship was dying, effectively neutralized within the first few minutes of the attack. As for the men trapped aboard, it seemed like the end, a swift, brutal victory for the seemingly invincible Japanese air power. But Doris Miller, unable to reach his destroyed battle station, refused to succumb to the chaos or the sense of doom. Instead of seeking shelter below, he made his way topside, emerging onto the main deck into a scene of utter devastation. Fires burned fiercely, wounded men lay scattered across the buckled steel plates, and the air crackled with the sound of ongoing machine gun fire and explosions. His first instinct was driven by duty and humanity. He saw his ship's commander, Captain Benyon, lying grievously wounded on the bridge wing, still attempting to command his dying ship. The area was still under heavy strafing fire from Japanese fighters making secondary runs. Disregarding the extreme personal danger, Miller, renowned for his powerful build, joined another sailor. Some accounts identify him as Ensign Victor Delano, in a desperate attempt to move the captain to a safer location. They carefully lifted Benyon, struggling under his weight amidst the smoke and shrapnel, trying to get him out of the direct line of fire. It was a selfless act of immense courage, far removed from the duties of a ship's cook. This was the first undeniable moment Miller shattered the Navy's narrow expectations, a mess attendant risking everything, under horrific conditions, to aid his white commanding officer. Though moved slightly, the stoic Captain Benyon refused to leave his post, demanding to remain on the bridge where he could oversee the damage control efforts until he bled to death approximately 2 hours later, posthumously receiving the Medal of Honor. With Captain Benyon being tended to by medical personnel, Miller found himself adrift in the swirling chaos of battle. A man without an assigned station but possessing a fierce determination to contribute. He was ordered, or perhaps volunteered, accounts differ slightly, to assist other sailors who were desperately trying to keep the ship's remaining anti-aircraft guns supplied with ammunition. As he helped shuttle heavy belts of .50 caliber rounds towards the gun emplacements still spitting defiance at the sky, he noticed something critical. One, possibly two, of the Browning M2.50 caliber anti-aircraft machine guns mounted on the deck were unmanned. Their designated gunners were likely among the hundreds of casualties the West Virginia suffered in those first devastating minutes. The guns were operational, ammunition was nearby, but there was no one left to fire them. For Doris Miller, this was the pivotal moment. He stood before a weapon he had never been trained to operate, a weapon his rank and race explicitly barred him from manning in any normal circumstance. He saw the enemy planes continuing their deadly passes overhead. He saw his shipmates falling around him. He saw a tool of defense sitting idle. In that instant, surrounded by fire and death, the Navy's regulations, the ingrained prejudice, the limitations imposed upon him became utterly irrelevant. Here was the silver bullet, the unexpected opportunity born of disaster, the chance to strike back against the force destroying his world. He knew, perhaps from observing drills or simply from innate mechanical aptitude, the basic operation of the weapon. He saw the desperate need. He made a decision that would echo through history, defying every rule, every expectation, every ingrained limitation of his designated role. Doris Miller stepped up to the unmanned .50 caliber machine gun. He muscled the heavy weapon into position, chambered a belt of ammunition, and began firing at the attacking Japanese aircraft. Eyewitness accounts from surviving officers and sailors consistently described Miller firing the weapon with remarkable calmness and effectiveness, despite his complete lack of formal training. He tracked the incoming dive bombers and fighters, leading them appropriately, unleashing steady, controlled bursts of the powerful .50 caliber rounds for approximately 15 minutes. Amidst the continuing explosions and chaos on the deck of the sinking battleship, Miller stood his ground, pouring fire into the sky. He continued firing, switching targets, engaging plane after plane, until the ammunition belts finally ran dry, and the definitive order to abandon ship was given. The exact number of Japanese aircraft Doris Miller shot down that morning remains a subject of historical debate, lost in the fog of war and the sheer pandemonium of the attack. Some reports credit him with downing at least one enemy plane, while others suggest possibly two, or even contributing to the damage of several more. But the precise tally is almost secondary to the significance of the act itself. Here was a ship's cook, third class, an African-American man deliberately excluded from combat training by the policies of his own Navy, spontaneously taking control of one of the ship's most vital defensive weapons and using it effectively against the enemy under the most extreme duress imaginable. It was a stunning repudiation of the racist assumptions underpinning the Navy's segregationist policies. It was the ultimate systemic collapse of a flawed doctrine, exposed by the undeniable reality of individual courage and capability. It was, in its own way, Doris Miller's pro-revenge against a system that had profoundly underestimated him and countless others like him. He proved, in 15 minutes of hellfire, that skill, courage, and patriotism were not dictated by skin color or assigned duty. The USS West Virginia settled onto the harbor floor, a catastrophic loss, but thanks to the shallow water and the efforts of men like Miller, many of its crew survived. Miller himself safely abandoned ship. In the immediate aftermath, amidst the staggering losses and recriminations, tales of heroism began to emerge. Miller's actions were noted by surviving officers, but initially his identity remained obscured by the Navy's reluctance to highlight the contributions of black sailors. The initial commendation list simply praised the bravery of an unnamed Negro mess attendant. This anonymity, however, did not sit well with the African-American community or the increasingly vocal black press. Newspapers like the Pittsburgh Courier launched a campaign demanding that the Navy identify and properly honor this hero. Faced with mounting public pressure and recognizing the powerful symbolism of Miller's actions, the Navy relented. Miller's bravery earned him a personal commendation from the Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knox. Then came the formal recognition. On May 27, 1942, in a ceremony freighted with historical significance held aboard the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise at Pearl Harbor, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, the newly appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, personally pinned the Navy Cross onto Doris Miller's chest. It was the Navy's third highest award for valor, surpassed only by the Medal of Honor and the Navy Distinguished Service Medal. Doris Miller became the first African-American sailor in history to receive this prestigious decoration. He was promoted, not in rank initially, but elevated to the status of a national hero, a symbol of courage transcending racial lines. His image, clutching the Navy Cross, was soon emblazoned on recruitment posters aimed specifically at Black Americans. Under slogans like, "Above and beyond the call of duty," Miller became an overnight celebrity, albeit a reluctant one. He was brought back to the mainland United States and embarked on a grueling war bond tour, speaking to crowds across the country, encouraging support for the war effort, and serving as a powerful, living rebuke to segregation. However, Miller chafed under the spotlight. He was a sailor, not a public figure, and he repeatedly requested a return to sea duty. His request was eventually granted. After further service, including time aboard the USS Indianapolis, he was assigned to the newly commissioned escort carrier USS Liscum Bay CVE 56. Tragically, his return to the Pacific War Zone would be short-lived. On November 24, 1943, during the amphibious landings for the Battle of Macon Atoll in the Gilbert Islands, the Liscum Bay was struck by a single torpedo from the Japanese submarine I-175. The torpedo hit near the Bucaria's aircraft bomb storage magazine. The resulting explosion was catastrophic, ripping the small carrier apart in minutes. It sank rapidly, taking 644 officers and men with it, including ship's cook, first class, Doris Miller. He was initially listed as missing in action, his death confirmed a year later. The villains, the deeply ingrained system of segregation and prejudice, had been forced to acknowledge Miller's heroism, but systemic change was slow. His sacrifice, however, added momentum to the growing calls for desegregation within the armed forces, a goal that would finally be achieved by President Truman's executive order in 1948. The Navy continued to honor Miller's legacy. On June 30, 1973, it commissioned the Knox-class frigate USS Miller FF-1091 in his memory, a significant step in recognizing African-American contributions. But perhaps the greatest honor is yet to come. The fourth Ford-class nuclear-powered supercarrier, CVN-81, scheduled for commissioning around 2032, will be named the USS Doris Miller. It will be the first aircraft carrier ever named for an enlisted sailor and the first named for an African-American, a monumental tribute solidifying his place in the pantheon of American naval heroes. Doris Miller's story remains a powerful and enduring testament. It reminds us forcefully that heroism is not constrained by color, rank, or the narrow confines of an assigned role. It demonstrates that in the crucible of crises, extraordinary courage can emerge from the most unexpected individuals. Miller did not just fight the Japanese bombs and torpedoes on December 7th. He fought against the invisible, yet profoundly damaging limitations imposed upon him by the prejudices of his own nation. His 15 minutes of courageous defiance not only contributed to the defense of his ship but also struck a significant blow against the walls of racial segregation within the American military. The lesson embedded in his actions is clear and timeless. Underestimating human potential based on preconceived notions or systemic biases is not merely a moral failing. It is a strategic blunder. True strength lies in recognizing and unleashing the capabilities within everyone, regardless of their background. Doris Miller, the cook who became a national hero, proved that the human spirit, when tested, can rise above any man-made barrier. His legacy challenges us to look beyond labels and see the potential for greatness that resides within us all.